I was never a hero, never wanted to be one. The galaxy had enough of those already. The soldiers, the revolutionaries, the fools who thought they could change the universe with a well-placed bullet. Me, I was just another scavenger picking through the wreckage of forgotten wars, trying to make enough credits to keep my ship running and my stomach full. That's what brought me to Kira 9. The planet had been a battleground once, a major conflict between the Terran Federation and the Dominion. Now it was nothing but dust and ruins, the bones of dead civilizations scattered beneath an angry, crimson sky. Some called it cursed, haunted by the ghosts of those who had died screaming beneath orbital bombardments. Maybe they were right. Had landed in what used to be a city, or what was left of one. Broken towers jutted from the ground like shattered teeth, their surfaces scorched and crumbling. The streets had turned to rubble, littered with scraps of alien technology, discarded. Weapons and the occasional skeleton half buried in the sand. There was money to be made here. Old Dominion tech fetched a high price on the black market. I had just finished stripping a wrecked scout drone for parts when I saw her. At first, I thought she was another corpse. She was curled against the base of a fallen column, her body thin and motionless, caked in dirt and dried blood. Her skin was silver blue, the color of the sky just before dawn, and I could see faint scars running along her arms and legs. Her hair, long, tangled and pale, as moonlight, was matted with dust. She had no clothes, no possessions, nothing to indicate where she had come from or who she had been before the war had swallowed this place whole. Then she moved. It was small, a shiver, a slow tightening of her limbs, as if she were trying to make herself smaller. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, and when I stepped closer, her golden eyes fluttered open. She saw me and flinched, scrambling backward until her spine hit the ruined stone. Her hands clenched into fists, her whole body trembling like a cornered animal. I stopped, raising my hands to show I wasn't a threat. "Easy," I said, my voice softer than I thought it could be. "I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't answer, didn't make a sound, just watched me with wide, unblinking eyes. She was terrified, not just of me, of everything. Up close, I could see just how bad off she was. Her ribs pressed against her skin like they were trying to escape, and the scars on her arms weren't just from injuries. Some were deliberate, thin, precise lines that ran in strange, unnatural patterns. Dominion work, maybe. I had seen their experiments before. Not many survived. She was starving, weak. If I left her here, she wouldn't last another day. I pulled off my coat and crouched down, holding it out to her. She hesitated, then snatched it from my hands, wrapping it tightly around herself. Her fingers clutched the fabric like she thought I might take it away. I rummaged through my pack and pulled out a ration bar, setting it on the ground between us. "Go on," I urged. She didn't trust me. That much was obvious. But hunger won, out over fear. She lunged for the food, tearing into it with shaking hands, shoving bites into her mouth so fast I thought she might choke. She ate like she hadn't seen food in days, maybe longer. I waited until she slowed down, watching her carefully. "You got a name?" She stiffened. Her golden eyes flicked to me, wary. I sighed. "All right, you don't have to talk." She hadn't spoken a single word. Maybe she couldn't, maybe she had forgotten how. I should have left, should have taken my parts and walked away. She wasn't my problem, but I knew what would happen. If I abandoned her, the Dominion still patrolled this place, searching for anything useful, anything salvageable. If they found her, she wouldn't be so lucky next time. I wasn't a hero, never wanted to be one. But as I watched the girl in the ruins, wrapped in my coat, her eyes filled with fear and exhaustion, I knew I couldn't leave her behind. Not this time. She didn't speak. Not a word. Not when I asked her name. Not when I offered her food. Not when I tried to explain that I wasn't going to hurt her. At first, I thought maybe she couldn't. Maybe whatever had happened to her had stolen her voice along with everything else. But there was something in the way she looked at me, the way her eyes darted to my every movement, assessing, calculating, waiting. It wasn't just silence. It was survival. She had learned that speaking could be dangerous. She moved cautiously, flinching whenever I shifted too fast or reached for something near her. When I stood, she shrank back. When I sat, she stayed curled up against the ruins, as far from me as possible, without outright running. Even with my coat wrapped around her, she shivered, her bony fingers gripping the fabric, like it was the only thing anchoring her to this world. She was a survivor. That much was clear. I kept my distance at first, giving her space. I set out food and water every so often, pretending not to watch as she edged closer, hesitating before snatching it up. She ate in small, frantic bites, stuffing her cheeks like a starving animal afraid someone might take it away. She never let her guard down. Not for a second. I wondered how long she had been here. Days, weeks, maybe longer. Kira 9 had been abandoned for months, ever since the Dominion pulled out, leaving nothing but wreckage and radiation behind. But some ruins went deeper than others. Some secrets stayed buried longer. At night, I built a fire, more for her sake than mine. The nights here were cold, the kind of cold that gnawed into your bones and didn't let go. She stayed close enough to feel the warmth, but never close enough to be within reach. She watched me, though, always watching. I tried speaking to her in different languages, Standard, Dominion, even a few broken phrases from old Kiran dialects I had picked up over the years. Nothing. Either she didn't understand, or she wasn't willing to let me know that she did. That was fine. I wasn't in a rush. The scars on her arms and legs told me enough. Some were old, faded into thin white lines, but others were fresher, raised welts that hadn't fully healed. Some looked surgical, too precise to be anything but deliberate. I'd seen marks like that before. The Dominion didn't just kill their enemies. Sometimes they studied them first. I didn't ask. She wouldn't have answered anyway. She barely slept. Every time I dozed off, I'd wake up to find her sitting upright, staring into the darkness. At first, I thought she was watching for threats. Dominion patrols, scavengers, something lurking. In the ruins. But the longer I observed, the more I realized. She wasn't just afraid of what was out there, she was afraid of what had already happened. One night, after hours of silence, she finally moved closer to the fire. Not close enough to touch, but enough that the flickering light cast shadows across her face. Her eyes reflected the flames, golden and wide, full of something I couldn't quite name. I reached into my pack and pulled out another ration bar, setting it beside me. She hesitated, then crawled forward on shaky limbs, snatching it up before retreating again. This time, though, she didn't eat right away. She looked at me. Really looked at me, like she was trying to figure out why I was still here, why I hadn't left her behind, why I hadn't hurt her yet. I sighed, leaning back against the stone. You don't trust me. I get it. She blinked, silent. I shook my head. You don't have to. I'm not asking for anything. Just eat. She hesitated for a long moment before finally biting into the ration. Progress. I wasn't sure what I was doing. I hadn't planned on taking in a stray girl with nothing but scars and silence. I had come here to scavenge, to take what I needed, and leave before the Dominion decided to reclaim their graveyard. But something about her made walking away impossible. Maybe it was the way she fought so hard to keep going, even when it was clear she had nothing left. Maybe it was the way her hands shook when she thought I wasn't looking. Or maybe, deep down, I recognized something in her, something I had tried to forget about myself. A survivor who had lost everything. I didn't know if she would ever speak to me. I didn't know if she would ever trust me. But I knew one thing. She wasn't alone anymore. It took days before she made a sound. Days of slow movements, quiet nights, and offering her food without expecting anything in return. She never spoke, never even attempted to, but her body language shifted, small changes, barely noticeable if I wasn't paying attention. At first, she wouldn't come near me at all, but over time, she inched closer to the fire. Eventually, she stopped flinching every time I moved. She was still wary, though. Every time I left to scavenge, I'd return to find her watching me from whatever corner she had decided was safest that day. Sometimes she was standing, sometimes crouched, like she was ready to bolt if I did anything unexpected. I never moved too fast, never raised my voice. One night as I sat by the fire, she did something different. She didn't just watch me from a distance. She studied me, eyes tracking every motion of my hands as I cleaned my knife, flicking toward my pack when I reached for something. I pretended not to notice, letting her take her time. I'd stopped trying to ask her name a while ago. It seemed pointless. If she wanted to tell me, she would. Then she surprised me. She shifted, hesitated, then pressed a hand to her chest. Her fingers trembled against her own skin, but her golden eyes never left mine. Lyra. Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper, like she hadn't used it in a long time. Maybe she hadn't. I sat up slowly, careful not to startle her. "Lyra," I repeated. She flinched just a little, like hearing someone else say it was unfamiliar to her, but she didn't pull away. "That's a beautiful name," I said, keeping my voice gentle. She didn't respond, but she also didn't retreat. I took that as a good sign. It was the first step, a small one, but a step nonetheless. The next night she spoke again. It wasn't much, just a single word. "Why?" I looked up from where I was cleaning a salvaged power cell. She was staring at me, her fingers curled tightly in the fabric of my coat, the only thing she had. "Why?" "What?" I asked, setting the power cell aside. Her eyes flicked to the fire, then back to me. She swallowed hard, as if forcing the words out took effort. "Why, help?" I exhaled. I wasn't sure how to answer that. I hadn't really asked myself either. It would have been easier to leave her behind, simpler, but I hadn't. I could have lied, told her some noble-sounding reason, but I wasn't a hero. I was just a scavenger. So I told the truth. "I don't know." She frowned, like she didn't believe me. I shrugged. "It didn't seem right to leave you here." She stared at me for a long time after that. Then she nodded, just once, before pulling the coat tighter around herself. She didn't ask again. As the days passed, she spoke more. Not much, just small things, a hesitant thank you when I handed her food, a quiet no when I asked if she remembered where she had come from. But it was something. She never spoke about what had happened to her. She never mentioned the scars. I didn't push. One night, as the fire burned low, she surprised me again. She reached out, fingers brushing against my sleeve, before pulling back quickly, like she was afraid she had done something wrong. I glanced at her. "Lyra?" She hesitated. Then, in a barely audible voice, she whispered, "Don't leave." The words hit me harder than I expected. I nodded. "I won't." And for the first time since I found her, she believed me. The ruins were never truly silent. Even in the dead of night, the wind howled through broken structures, rattling metal debris and carrying whispers of a war that had long since ended. But silence wasn't the only thing lurking in the ruins. The Dominion still patrolled these graveyards, searching for anything they had left behind. Weapons, tech, survivors. Lyra knew this. She moved like she had been running from them her entire life, always watching the shadows, listening for the faint hum of drones before I even heard them. When I taught her how to move quietly, how to listen for signs of patrols, she didn't need much instruction. She already knew. That should have been my first clue. We traveled through the ruins together, moving from one abandoned sector to another, scavenging supplies while staying out of sight. Lyra never let me stray too far, always trailing a few steps behind. her body tense with the kind of awareness that only came from experience. She never asked where we were going. She never asked if there was a plan. She only asked if the Dominion would find us. I told her no. I wasn't sure if that was a lie. One afternoon, we hid beneath the wreckage of a collapsed transport hub as a Dominion patrol passed overhead. A low-flying drone scanned the streets, its blue lights casting eerie glows across the rubble. Lyra pressed herself against the wall beside me, barely breathing, her fingers curled into fists. I placed a hand on her arm just for a second, a silent reassurance. She didn't move, didn't look at me, but she didn't pull away either. We waited until the drone was gone before slipping out of our hiding place. I expected her to be shaken. Instead, she was composed, her golden eyes scanning the ruins for any more threats. That's when I realized she had done this before. Many times. Later that night, as we sat by a dim fire, I finally asked, "How long were you running?" She tensed. For a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "Always." One word. But it told me everything. She had never known safety, never known rest. The war hadn't just taken her home. It had made her into prey, a fugitive running from something bigger than herself. I wanted to ask what had happened to her people, if there had been others like her, if she had lost someone. But I didn't. I already knew the answer. She was alone. A few days later, the patrols became more frequent. I wasn't sure if they were looking for something specific or if we had just been unlucky, but it didn't matter. We needed to get off this planet. We moved carefully, only traveling. At night, Lyra never complained, never hesitated. She was used to it, too used to it. One night, as we crossed the ruins of an old market district, she suddenly stopped. "Wait," she whispered. I froze. She tilted her head, listening. Then, without another word, she grabbed my sleeve and pulled me back. We ducked behind a collapsed wall, just as two Dominion soldiers stepped into view, their rifles slung across their backs. They spoke in low voices, scanning the area like they were searching for something, or someone. Lyra held her breath. I could feel her trembling beside me, but not from fear, from rage. I had never seen that in her before. She gripped my arm, her nails digging into my sleeve. I didn't move, didn't say anything. We just waited as the soldiers continued past, their footsteps fading into the distance. When they were gone, Lyra exhaled shakily and released me. I looked at her. "You okay?" She nodded. But I wasn't. Sure, I believed her. That was the moment I realized. She wasn't just afraid of the Dominion, she hated them. The Dominion had left scars on Lyra, but not just the kind that marked her skin. There was something deeper, something carved into her very being. Fear, hatred, a quiet, simmering rage that she had kept buried beneath her silence. Now I had seen it. She never spoke about what they had done to her, but she didn't have to. I saw it in the way she flinched at the sound of their drones, the way her hands curled into fists whenever we hid from patrols. I saw it in the way she refused to look at their uniforms when they passed, as if even glancing at them might bring back something too painful to bear. She had suffered under them, survived them, and she wanted them gone. I knew that feeling well enough. The Dominion had taken plenty from me too, though nothing compared to what they had done to her. I had been a scavenger for a long time, drifting from war zone to war zone, picking apart the wreckage of empires. I had seen what the Dominion left behind, entire civilizations reduced to ash, cities turned to graves. But Lyra, she wasn't just a casualty of their war. She had been something to them, a subject, an experiment. She hadn't just escaped, she had been let go. That thought haunted me more than anything, because the Dominion didn't leave survivors, unless they had a reason. We had to get off this planet. I had a ship, but it was stashed miles from here, hidden in the wreckage of an old outpost. It wouldn't be an easy trip, not with patrols sweeping through the ruins, but staying here wasn't an option. Every day we lingered, the Dominion got closer. Lyra didn't argue when I told her the plan. She simply nodded, as if she had been waiting for this moment since the second I found her. That night, we moved. The ruins stretched before us like the skeleton of some long-dead beast, its bones twisted and broken. The wind howled through shattered buildings, carrying the echoes of a lost civilization. Lyra walked beside me, her bare feet soundless on the cracked pavement. She moved with practiced ease, never stepping on loose rubble, never making a sound, led the way, but in truth, she was the one guiding me. She knew this place better than I did. She knew where to hide, when to stop, when to listen. Halfway through our journey, we heard voices. Lyra stiffened. I barely had time to react before she grabbed my sleeve and pulled me into the shadows. We pressed against the remains of a collapsed building as a squad of Dominion soldiers passed by. 5 of them, heavily armed. They were searching for something or someone. Lyra held her breath. Her fingers dug into my arm, not out of fear, but something sharper, something colder. She was shaking, not with terror, with fury. I leaned in close, whispering, "Stay put." She didn't look at me, didn't blink, just stared at the soldiers, with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. I saw it then, the way her body tensed, the slight shift of her weight forward. She wanted to fight, wanted to lash out, she wanted to kill them. I grabbed her wrist, firm but careful. "Not now," I murmured. She trembled beneath my grip, but after a long, tense moment, she nodded. Slowly, the soldiers moved on. When they were gone, I let her go. She didn't speak, neither did I. We kept moving. By dawn, we were only a few miles from my ship. The wreckage of the outpost loomed ahead, its rusted walls barely standing after years of neglect. We had almost made it. Then Lyra stopped. She stood still, eyes locked on something in the distance, a Dominion outpost, small, temporary, but active. I swore under my breath. "They're blocking the path to my ship." Lyra didn't react. She just stared at the outpost, expression unreadable. Then, softly she whispered, "I can get us through." I turned to her. "How?" She met my gaze, something dark flickering in her golden eyes. "I know how they work." And for the first time since I found her, I saw the truth. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a weapon. I should have known. The signs had been there all along. Her silence, her scars, the way she moved like someone who had spent her whole life in hiding. But it wasn't just fear that had shaped her. It was something else, something darker. The Dominion hadn't just hurt her. They had made her into something. She crouched beside me in the ruins, staring at the outpost ahead. From a distance, it looked like a temporary station. 3 armored tents, a command hub, a landing pad with a single transport ship. The soldiers moved in predictable patrols, their helmets reflecting the dim light of Kera 9's pale sun. It wasn't heavily fortified, but it didn't have to be. No one was supposed to be here. No one was supposed to survive. I glanced at Lyra. She was watching them, her golden eyes flicking over their movements with precise calculation. Not fear, not hesitation. Familiarity. "You've been inside a place like this before," I said quietly. She nodded. I waited, giving her a chance to say more. She didn't. I ran a hand over my face. "All right, you said you can get us through. How?" She exhaled slowly, pressing her fingers to her temple like she was trying to force words out. She still spoke sparingly, as if language itself was foreign. To her, they don't look for what they think they already own. The way she said it made my stomach turn. I looked at her, really looked at her. She was small, frail from months, maybe years, of starvation. She had no armor, no weapons, just the oversized coat I had given her hanging loosely off her bony frame. But when she spoke, there was something else there, something cold. They track movement, heat signatures, she continued, her voice distant, detached. But they won't register me. I know how to move past them. A pit formed in my gut. Why? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled back the sleeve of her coat and held out her arm. At first, I only saw the scars, faint white lines, raised welts from injuries that had never healed properly. But beneath those, something else. Faint silver etchings ran along, her skin barely visible unless the light hit them just right. Patterns, intricate and unnatural, embedded deep beneath the surface. Not scars, implants. My breath hitched, the Dominion's work. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. What did they do to you? Lyra stared at her own arm, as if she was seeing it for the first time. Changed me, she whispered. I closed my eyes for a second, rage burning through me. The Dominion had been experimenting on people for decades, using prisoners and civilians alike as test subjects, augmenting them, breaking them, turning them into weapons, then discarding them when they failed to meet expectations. Lyra hadn't escaped. She had been let go, or worse, forgotten. I took a slow breath. And you can use that to get us through? She nodded. If I go first? They won't react. I can shut down the scanner, get you past the defenses. It was a good plan, a reckless one, a dangerous one, and she knew it. I looked at her, searching for any sign of fear. There was none. They'll recognize you, I said. If you were theirs once, they might still... They won't. The way she said it left no room for doubt. I didn't like it. Every instinct in me screamed to keep her away from that place, to find another way. But there wasn't one. We needed that ship, and Lyra, she needed this, not just to escape, to prove to herself, to the Dominion, to the universe, that they didn't own her anymore. I exhaled, nodding. All right, let's do it. For the first time since I found her, she almost smiled. Lyra moved like a ghost. I watched as she stepped out of the ruins, her bare feet making no sound against the cracked pavement. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She walked toward the Dominion outpost like she belonged there, like she had every right to be there. And for a terrifying moment I thought she did. The guards at the perimeter didn't react to her approach. No raised weapons, no shouted warnings. The automated turrets remained still. The scanners, the motion detectors, nothing triggered. She had been right. They didn't look for what they thought they already owned. I stayed hidden in the shadows, my pulse hammering against my ribs as she reached the main checkpoint. A Dominion soldier stood there, half-bored, his rifle slung lazily across his chest. He barely even looked at her. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. She walked past him, just like that. My hands clenched into fists. I hated this, hated watching her slip into their world like she was still a part of it. But I forced myself to wait. This was her plan, and it was working. A few minutes later, the lights around the perimeter flickered. Then the security grid dropped. That was my signal. I moved fast, staying low as I sprinted through the gap in their defenses. Lyra had disabled the scanners, but that didn't mean we were safe. The moment they realized something was wrong, they'd lock the place down. I found her near the command tent, crouched beside a terminal. Her fingers hovered over the controls, her golden eyes scanning the data streaming across the screen. "They're sending a report soon," she murmured. "We have 5 minutes." I nodded. "Then let's move." The ship was on the landing pad, its engines powered down, but still warm. Dominion transports had biometric locks, but I had ways around that. Nothing a good override tool couldn't handle. Lyra stood by the ramp, shifting on her feet. She kept glancing over her shoulder, her body tense. "Lyra," I said quietly, "we need to go." She didn't answer, her hands clenched into fists, her breathing was uneven. For the first time since I found her, she looked uncertain. I stepped closer. "What is it?" She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. I could end them. I understood immediately. The outpost, the soldiers, the ones who had done this to her, or at least ones just like them. She had slipped past them without a fight, but she didn't want to run. She wanted revenge. I placed a hand on her shoulder. She flinched, but she didn't pull away. "You don't owe them anything," I said. "Not even your hate." Her fingers trembled. I could see the war inside her, the need to hurt them the way they had hurt her. But in the end, she wasn't like them. She was better. She exhaled sharply, then nodded. We boarded the ship. The moment. We were inside. I locked down the ramp and fired up the engines. The Dominion alarms blared behind us as soldiers poured onto the landing pad, raising their weapons. Too late. The thrusters roared, and we shot into the sky, breaking free of Kira 9's ruined surface. The stars stretched before us, endless and open. Lyra sat in the co-pilot's seat, staring at the void outside. For the first time, she was free.